Welcome back. Welcome back to the Detroit is Different podcast studios. And it's here. That means spring is here. New beginnings. So many good things. And surprisingly, you can, put up the winter coat. And when we think about things changing, you think about spring, you immediately think of summer. When you think of summer, you think of summertime. You think of little homies, or I guess better yet, the youth, young people. And the person I got in studio is definitely engaging in so many people that are engaging with the young people. Angelique Power, how are you today?
I'm doing better now.
Oh, see? Now, we met at the New Detroit Just Lead Conference. Because sometimes I go outside the studio and kind of do the studio thing in other places, and I get the opportunity to, throw some questions at people. I threw some questions at you, and it was like, whoa. I was not expecting a lot of that.
We had a good conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I like talking all the time. Mm-hmm. But now I'm really ready to listen, but I still got a lot of questions for you because I immediately said, okay, for you to so eloquently unpack the relationship of where a lot of us need to look at education now. So when I say a lot of us, I'm speaking from, you ain't been inside of high school since you was out of high school. So that's what I'm talking about, us as adults and the ideas of what we're thinking is happening in schools versus what's happening just from the infrastructure of looking at the way that charter systems and public systems, homeschooling systems, all are interconnected now. Mm-hmm. It's 2025. This is not Saved by the Bell anymore, But shout out to those days, So with that, I was like, okay, you're unpacking this where you're living in it and you really made it very plain of how so many of these systems have changed, which naturally always leads to like, okay, I have to get the backstory. You and your story. Mm-hmm. So I know you were in the D, but from our sister city.
Yes.
Or brother city or cousin city, however we want to call it.
Yes.
Chicago.
Yes.
Coming up.
Yes. In the D, everyone's like east side, west side. I'm like, I'm south side all day.
Okay.
So I was raised on the south side, born on the south side, raised on the south side. And I'm the youngest of 7. I am... My parents have both passed, but my mother was a Chicago public school teacher, and my father was a Chicago police officer.
Okay, well, condolences on that. And then also, so just public service in the veins.
Yes.
And 7.
Well, that is a whole other podcast. It was 6 most of my life, and then we discovered we had another sibling in the past, 5 years, which has been a gift to us, actually. So now I have to think, it's actually 7. The other thing I'll say about my family is that my mother was white and Jewish and my father was black. And so we had really interesting dinner table conversations. My mother as a teacher and my father as a police officer, they were very aware that the folks that they interacted with were caught up in these massive systems and that my mother was meeting with them early in the system work, and my father was meeting with them later in the system work, and that those systems weren't designed for them and weren't designed to do, to allow them to figure out where they wanted to go and design their own destiny. I think the cross-cultural piece allowed me to see something that I think I integrate into just the way that I approach this work, which is we are in relationship with each other, and the perception of cultural difference is just a perception. And so I'm always trying to figure out ways to bridge and connect and also ways to disrupt systems so that they actually work for young people instead of against them.
Okay. That is, as you all see, why I was like, okay, I have to find out more that gets into the thought process of something like that, just to know offhand. And now I understand more of those layers. So Southside Chicago, if people are unaware, And if you're from Detroit, you know you got family in Chicago.
Everyone does. Everyone that I meet in Detroit, they're like, you know what? I used to spend my summers out on, 95th. And so,
Yeah.
we are very close. And I think there's a lot of crossover. And these cities are very different.
Very close, very different. The one thing that does stand out, and even that's very different, is the way that the communities are segregated. That's the one thing that does stand. So when you talk about what's cross-cultural, when I think about my times and my cousins in Chicago, I really recognize and you feel the energy differently because it's different there where, you can go 2 blocks east, 2 blocks west, 2 blocks north, 2 blocks south. And it's like, okay, I guess this is the Puerto Rican community.
I'm in a different country. Yes. I've crossed over into, so Hyde Park. I was born in Bronzeville and then raised in Hyde Park. In these communities, which South Side and West Side are predominantly Black communities. And just like here, if someone is from Chicago and you're Black, you're like, are you South Side or West Side? And I have feelings about which side is the best side, and clearly it's South Side. So,
oh man,
it is the way that it is.
Oh man.
So then you do your own smack talking with someone, but you quickly figure out how you're related. And it's high school. Like, where'd you go to high school? But like 6 or 7 people in common. Between the South Side and the West Side, though, there's Chinatown, there's Pilsen, there's Little Village. Pilsen and Little Village is where a lot of Latino communities are. Chinatown is predominantly Asian. So, and then you'll have pockets of like ethnic white communities.
So for the Detroiters, meaning that what we consider Hamtramck for so long, like Eastern European communities, so strong Polish and Irish, and even like it would be other communities that do exist in Chicago that you know it from the one thing that does bring culture together, and that's food.
Yes, that's true. And actually, so people traverse into most of those communities. When we were younger, there were some that we were not allowed to go into for our own safety.
Yeah. And then you also think of the way that some of the systems in Chicago, strong Irish heritage and the Irish relationship between the parishes and the Catholic churches and those relationships with the police officers and the fire stations.
And so that, to explain the communities we weren't allowed to go into, Bridgeport, which has changed now, but that was a very Irish community. The former Mayor Daley, his family was from there. I'm good friends with one of the Daley children now, but Bridgeport was a place where you did not go if you were Black. And actually, there was a crime reported from there of a 12-year-old Black child who was beat by 4 white teenagers with a bat. And so that was the kind of thing where it was neighboring communities, but it wasn't necessarily like a united, like the United States. Well, actually, I can't even say the United States as an analogy.
Well, I would say that it's very much apropos.
Yeah.
And that's where the vision now, understanding that civil servants are just the lens in which you see this from.
Yes.
So Chicago Public Schools.
Yes.
So
my mom taught in Chicago Public Schools. I was just talking about this the other day. I remember from an early age, what it meant to be a teacher was a really big deal. And I knew it was important because there were young people who would stop my mom everywhere we'd go, like in grocery stores or like on the street. Our phone would ring late at night, and she was just like a rock star. And that is what I really remember of teachers. I also remember that my mom had a Monday dress, a Tuesday dress, a Wednesday dress, a Thursday, and a Friday dress. Like, she would wear the same dress that day of the week. She would spend a lot of our dollars on supplies for her classroom. The calls at night were sometimes counseling her students. So I knew that she was a really important figure. I also knew that she gave a lot of what she had to this work. And I would join her on the picket line from the time I was really young because at that point, teachers were paid less than janitors in their schools. And so there were a lot of strikes that the Chicago Teachers Union would do. And so I was really aware of the work that she had, the importance of it, the importance that she made in people's lives, and how undervalued her work was.
What grade?
What grade was
What
I?
grades was she teaching?
She taught high school English.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. She may have came across my uncle. My uncle was the principal at Dunbar.
What? My mom taught at Dunbar.
Well, Edgar Rulak. So shout out. You probably definitely had to cross paths. So Edgar Rulak, to the point where when you talk about people knowing people, like maybe like 87 at like the height of Mr. T being Mr. T, like walking past, it like, and Mr. T really talks like that.
Yeah.
So it's like, hey, Ed, Rulak, and then it blew my cousin Kielo because he was like, hey, I know Mr. T for real.
Yes.
So yeah, Edgar Rulak for years from their training program, he went from Tuskegee, working there into the Air Force. From the Air Force, learned a lot of the mechanical skills there, and then started in the instruction of mechanics and a lot of the vocationals there, and then went on to become the principal there.
That's
so
cool.
That was one of those things where it was always people being with my uncle, one of the coolest people, rest in peace, always around. So it's like he would know all these people on South Side of Chicago too. So visits to Chicago, he'd be like, yeah, we're going to drop this off with this family or do that, or it's going to be some other kids coming over. Everything would be cool.
It's such a small world. So we got there. Yes. My mother, she spent the first part of her career teaching at Dunbar. We grew up across the street from Dunbar.
Okay.
That was like Martin Luther King Drive.
Okay, so for people that don't know the area of Dunbar, it's definitely kind of like my community, meaning it's one of those communities that's definitely, if you're from the outside, you're like, oh, am I safe over here? You are safe if you know the right people.
Yes. Yeah. Who was it? Chris Rock, who was like, if you're ever on King Drive, like in any community.
Yes, it's probably not the most peaceful place. Is his joke? I'm gonna say it definitely just shows the stressors that can exist in communities like ours. With that, if you pour into those communities.
That's right. I mean, those are actually Bronzeville. So that's the heart of Bronzeville. That's where so much of the culture in Chicago comes from. And so those are underinvested communities. And that's why he made that joke. But it is actually where most of us have come up and come from.
Okay. So the six. So at the time, just growing up, you're the youngest of the six. How old is the oldest as far as like, are they in the crib? And then is it like one of those things where now, okay, it's competition, or is it one of those things like you the baby?
Yeah, I was the baby. And, it's two families. So my father was married. And by the time he was 24, he had 4 children. And he had a different job. He was a liquor salesman. And this is an interesting story. It's a side note, but it's an interesting story that there was an advertisement that the Chicago police did at that time. This was 1957. And it said, do you have a criminal mind? If so, we need you on our side.
Wow.
And my father signed up the very next day.
Now, rest in peace. In the future, I can't wait to interview your father with a response to an ad like that. It's
yes.
Like, what was you thinking?
I will tell you, my father wrote a book, and it's called Chicago: From the Great Depression to the Millennium, A Black Perspective.
Wow.
And he tells all of these stories in the book. So, and I'm so grateful for it. But he was one of the few, Black police officers at that time. My mother was a public school teacher, but her parents had passed away. And so she took another full-time job, which was as a police officer. And so she was working the night shift. She would teach during the day and work the night shift as an officer. And they met. And that's actually how they fell in love. My parents got married.
Time out. Now your mom sounded very interesting too. You
She
just
is.
say that like, okay, you know, when people think second job, they usually think it's something easy, something, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. Like, you know, hey, I'll do something very simple.
Yes. No. I mean, my mother, my goodness, I'm a writer, and so I have all of this work about my family that I will publish one day. But that woman was just sheer will. And so she just willed herself through these huge jobs. She had a lot of really interesting stories to tell about being a police officer during that time. I mean, growing up, we always grew up with guns in the house, and like she had her little lipstick revolver, that they called it. She was a determined woman, and there were a few jobs that were available for women at that time. You could be a teacher, you could be a nurse. And when she saw an opening as a policewoman, she was like, I'm going to take whatever I can.
And we also need to look, and I'm a man, so I'm speaking in retrospect from what I hear what women share. Things have gotten better, but definitely not to the level of equality that men have in many spaces.
Yes.
But in the places with the most machismo, it's going to always be tougher.
Yes.
I can only imagine what it was like in the 50s being on the force of the Chicago police.
Yes. I mean, I know more of my father's stories from that than I do my mother's.
Mom's. Yeah.
So my father, he talks a lot about what it felt like to be a Black police officer. When you were talking about Irish, how a lot of the Irish are police officers. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly right. That's actually where the expression paddy wagon comes from, right? Mm-hmm. And so that was a dinner table discussion. My father would talk to us about how the function of police was to always ensure that there's a class system.
It very much so. So that now I'm about to go on one of those, Kari, you talk more than the people interviewing. Please but do. I just want to contextualize some of this stuff of how I kind of know history when I speak of Western cultures and civilizations. So a lot of the way that America comes to existence of the people that found the nation, we're looking at, as they say, like some religious outcasts and people that aren't necessarily accepted into the heightened society of Western civilization, what we now like just label as whiteness across the board. So you're looking at like German, English, honor big time. What the Irish people went through in Ireland is study the history, like just the atrocities of so many things. I think, between not just the potato famine and how that happened, but so much of a lot of those atrocities. And it's one of those things where coming to America and to other colonies of different crowns was a way to assimilate, as we say, and that's what makes whiteness so tough here in America, because it's an assimilation of so many of these other cultures that have faced the same oppression from some of these same structures and these same systems, but the way to align with it is to enforce a lot of the atrocities that you were once facing. So that could be like the Polish, the Irish, the Scottish all come here, and through a lot of the parish systems, not demeaning any faith or anything, I'm just giving the structure of it. It's like, okay, we can get a lot of cops there to come here. Similar to out west, when Los Angeles is looking for police officers because so many Black people began to settle there, a lot of people from the South were specifically recruited, knowing that they're probably going to end up with a lot of people from the Ku Klux Klan to join the Los Angeles police. So similar in that same arc and those same theories of like, okay, we can give this group of people a role of enforcing a lot of the oppression that we would like to interact and engage to support, as you talked about, class, but more so like caste-based systems of you'll never have what we have, but you're not going to be like those people, and just continuing to enforce against those people. That's a broad generalization, but I tried to package it up for him.
It was very good. I think a lot of what my father wrote about the police at that time was that the majority of the force were actually like lower middle class, blue collar, and that tribalism was rampant internally. There wasn't a collective whiteness. So this is like late 50s, 60s, 70s. He was like, the Irish hated the Italians, they hated the Poles. Like everyone was sort of like tribalism inside. He was like, don't be a black person, or a Hispanic person, But there was this ethnic, it was early yet in the assimilation process. But, just like, and I've heard you talk a lot about our history and interpretation of how we kind of have gotten to where we are. So indentured servitude is a form of this, where,
Very much so.
Instead of truly we're all enslaved, but to give a group like the slightest stair step up where you have a limited time of your servitude, as long as you report the other enslaved people, as long as you express dominance, that begins an assimilation process into something else.
Yes. And so to say anybody's like your favorite president is weird just because the role of president is so odd. But as LBJ put it, as long as a white man feels better than a black man, they feel as though they're getting something. And that's a paraphrase version because it's a lot more colorful than that.
Yeah.
He says it. But the thought process is, as long as you feel better than someone else, and that even exists inside of cultures, inside of families, then that's how other structures, you're never going to necessarily look up and say, 1 second, time out. We can equalize a lot of this, not necessarily trying to get more than.
Right. I mean, that's the great rope-a-dope, is that we're not actually competing against each other. And that mindset means that we all lose. That actually there's a structure that's put in place where they are the ones that are profiting off of the confusion and the conflict. And so I think going back to, south side of Chicago, Hyde Park is somehow both a predominantly Jewish and a predominantly black neighborhood. So, I always say, like, there's a lot of people who have had really tough biracial experiences where they grow up and they're confused and they're rejected. And that was not my experience. Like, I felt like if you're going to be black and Jewish, like, grow up on the south side of Chicago in Hyde Park, and actually this enclave was extremely active in civil rights. And so the first black mayor of Chicago, so like the Coleman Young, the way that like folks here.
I was just about to ask you about Harold Washington.
Yes. So people ride for Coleman Young. People ride for Harold Washington.
Yep.
He was 2 blocks away from me in Hyde Park. He lived in the same building as Imani, one of my best friends growing up. So he was a known entity. He was like, you could see him walking down the street. For the first time when I was growing up, when he became mayor, our streets were plowed when it snowed. It wasn't like 3 days later where, and we were all digging ourselves out. So we definitely noticed the difference when we had the first black mayor.
So I definitely have to get that snapshot in time. I was going to have to ask you that question because that election is so monumental in time. I mean, the man got a community college named after him. It was like, hey, let's get, what was it like? You're watching this younger as a child, seeing all of this.
Yeah.
What was the moment like in Chicago to witness that?
It was beautiful. I think of that time, and when I see pictures of people like marching in the streets and handing out buttons, I see people I know, and I see people from different communities. it was a massive push of people, a multicultural coalition of people that were like, we need something very different. Keep in mind that this is like Daley had been in office for, 30 years, 20 plus years. Like,
and what I gotta do this too. The Daley family in Chicago would be like taking the Ford family, the Illich family, and what Dan Gilbert's been doing and putting it together and saying like, this family is in Detroit.
It's like one name. I actually think of Mayor Duggan a lot as like this version of Daley. There are two Daleys. There's the OG Daley, who was just outright racist and like, and then there was the next Daley, who wasn't outright racist, who did a lot for the city, especially the downtown area and things like that, who worked with business, who said very different things than the old Daley did, and kept getting reelected and would have kept getting reelected until he decided to not run again, So that's the closest. When I think about Duggan, I'm like, that's kind of like Detroit's Daley.
The second iteration.
Second iteration.
Yes.
Yeah. But no, the Harold Washington moment, it was glorious. And, I'll tell you, because I moved here 3.5 years ago, and we talked about education in Detroit. And a part of why I have a perspective on it is because I came really with no preconceived notions. And I spent a year talking to people and listening. I knew enough about Detroit that I knew that Detroiters do not suffer fools, that they have long memories, that things have been done to Detroit, that policy has been done to Detroit, that philanthropy has been done to Detroit, and that visionary Detroiters are doing for themselves outside of these sort of systems and structures. When I think of the concept of like a localized power grid, like a power grid that isn't connected to companies' power, but is like pulling in wind and pulling in solar and like powering its own, that is an analogy of a Detroiter.
I love that you said that. And I do want to get to Detroit, but I got to ask one more Chicago question.
Yes.
When it comes
I'll talk about Chicago all day.
When it comes to Black Chicago, the other thing that I really do think,
always,
and it's just real, and it's often painted, I think, in LA culture more.
Yeah.
But gang culture in Chicago, it's intergenerational.
Yes.
Like, between like folk and GD, like it's like I'm going into different communities and just going over traveling with different cousins.
Yes.
Where it's like, I mean, it's still family, but it's interconnected. I mean, the Stone Rangers, it's like the relationship between the neighborhoods and the street entities are so intertwined, and unpacking that, and especially having a father that was an officer, mother that was an officer, and someone in schools, because sometimes it's just painted with a broad brush. It's like, these people are in gangs and they're just crazy. And it's like, nah, it's a lot more layers to this.
There's a lot more layers. I want to call out my friend Natalie Moore, who wrote a book about the Black Stone Rangers. And so I would highly recommend reading about this culture. There is an ethos behind, especially the quote unquote, like gang culture. It really was like an informal economy for a lot of folks that were left out of the formal economy. And it was also like a social justice perspective of how you treat the community. There are so many things when we talk about like Black Panthers, there's a lot of that ethos actually that was running in a lot of the gangs that existed. A massive disruption happened to the gangs though. And so now if you look at what's happening in Chicago, it is so specific to, you were saying neighborhoods, it's now block by block by block. And it isn't necessarily tied to an informal economy. There isn't a massive hierarchy behind it of like, here are the top gang leaders and they have an agreement with each other and they have an agreement about children and they have an agreement about women. And it's very much like hyper focused over what your block is versus another block. And
that's where in understanding, when I travel, I think Sweetwater Farms Foundation, that's probably where I travel the most. So it's like, okay. So it's like going over there, it's like, okay, we're walking over to Hyde Park, where it's at, I'll bring some of the guys with me or whatever. And it's like, all right, this is going to sound crazy. Take off your baseball cap. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And it's like in understanding when you're crossing ties, but still having an understanding that this is just entrenched and thick, as you talk about block to block, and some of the people not even understand it, and you're born into this.
Yeah. I mean, we're talking about young people when we're talking about this. Mm-hmm. And we're talking about mostly young men when we're talking about this. And we're talking about how do you define your own masculinity? How do you stand up for yourself and your family? Like a lot of this language of gang warfare or gang violence, like it really is meant to other and dismiss a world that is actually huge and left out of opportunity. And it's real. When you are on the South Side, deep South Side, when you're on the West Side, you have to actually function understanding that it's not about keeping safe, although at some level it is about respect.
That's exactly, I love you framed it like that, because that's how I feel. It's similar to, like when people say, I had a friend, shout out Freddie, because Freddie used to say like, oh man, I want to go into the wilderness. I'm like, it's like the way you feel about urban wilderness, I feel about nature wilderness. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So you see it as like a bear, and you know how to function under that. I know how to function in spaces that other people would say like it's too dangerous. And I'm not saying necessarily danger would never come to me, but it's understanding where ethos, culture, the layers of how this community functions because of the lack of opportunities that are here. So the way that the opportunities are created within this underworld economy that is created here, that's what exists.
That's right. That's exactly right.
So coming to Detroit, and even before that, just you're moving in these spaces, drinking in community, loving community, understanding cross cultures, college, school, early work. How do you even end up in a space where you say like, I want to get into philanthropy? Because I don't even know where you check that box.
Right. I don't know. I mean, I never really said that because I had never heard the word philanthropy growing up. I didn't know there was a sector that was built on giving money away. That I didn't understand that like formalized function of philanthropy, but I understood in our communities what philanthropy was. Like it was picking up people on our way to school. It was bringing food to our neighbors when something happened. It was, pulling out the couch when somebody needed to spend the night. Like we have philanthropic communities through and through. We have mutual aid that's just a part of how we function. But the fact that there's like actually a job that you can do, I had no idea. I went to the University of Michigan. Go Blue.
Okay. All right. So you made your way this way already.
Yes. Oh, yes. Mm-hmm. I mean, actually, we had like a small cottage in Western Michigan when I was growing up. School teacher, police officer. A lot of Black police officers had cottages in Benton Harbor and like around there, St. Joe, Benton Harbor, South Haven.
Time out. Another Black city.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And so that's actually where a lot of Black police officers would go because they were furloughed in August or because they wanted to take vacations. And so we had a cottage. And so we would spend our summers and we would spend our weekends often like driving up to Michigan. So I always kind of felt that I had this like country mouse, city mouse part of my personality because when we went to Michigan, it was like very quiet. We grew our own food. We had blueberry bushes and all kinds of stuff. So University of Michigan, my sister Lisa and I both went to U of M. And it was almost like, I didn't say to myself, I want to go to University of Michigan. It was the last school I applied to, and I got in, and I was like, that sounds great. I think I'll go.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And U of M, being there, I know people were like, oh, we hate Michael Jordan. I'm just messing with you.
We're not going to talk smack about Jordan. Oh, man.
Oh, they changed the rules for him. I just got to get that off one more time for all your Chicago people watching.
You know.
All right. So U of M, after U of M.
After U of M, I actually had a full tuition grant. I decided from a young age, people would say, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I would say, I want to be a judge. And everyone was like, that's a really interesting answer for like a little shorty to say.
Yeah, especially depending upon the age. If a 6-year-old says that.
It was like probably around like 8 or 9, I started to say I want to be a judge.
That is definitely.
It was really, and I don't know where it came from. I think one of those dinner table conversations.
Okay.
Of like, well, why is this happening? Or why is this happening? And what I understood is that young people were moving from schools into prisons, and that there was something that had happened in the middle of it. And when, the school to prison pipeline, right? And when I tried to inject myself into a role, I thought the role would be as judge. Like I could make very different decisions.
Understanding the system and justice.
Yes.
So that's better than night court.
Yeah. Oh, yes. It had nothing to do with that. So the plan, as I started to learn more about school and what you could do, was that I would get a master's of social work, and then I would get a law degree. And I applied to get a master's of social work at the University of Michigan. I got in. I don't tell this story very often. I got a full tuition grant offered to me, which means I did not have to pay for graduate school. And then as a reward to myself for graduating from college, a high school friend of mine and I decided to go to Alaska for the summer and camp. I'd never camped in my life. I've never camped since. I guess I did.
Time out. So, of all the places you're going to start camping, I can only imagine Alaska. And boy, oh boy, that must be a close friend.
It was very strange. My parents were like, what the hell are you talking about?
But this is what you do that's what you do in your 20s.
That's what you do when you're the baby of the family, too.
Okay, all right.
The baby of the family is like, I'm just going to go to Alaska and I'm going to live in a tent, My parents were like, where are you going to go to the bathroom? That's what they just ask me repeatedly. But where? And so my friend and I, we drove to Alaska and we camped. We worked in canneries. We offloaded boats. And I have always been a writer. My whole life I've been a writer. And, when you go to Alaska in the summer, the sun doesn't really like rise and set. It kind of circles the sky. That's why it's light for so long. And so I just wrote and wrote and wrote. And by the time I came back, I knew I did not want to do my plan that I've had since I was...
Same way.
Yeah. That I actually wanted to root myself in what I felt was my unique power and ability and my purpose. And so on the first day of school, I went in and I went to admissions and I turned down the tuition grant and I told them I would not be going to school. My mother stopped talking to me for
I was going to say, yeah.
You're going to be a writer? You're going to be an artist? Oh, that's a great idea. Yeah, it was that kind of a conversation.
Especially blue collar parents.
Yes.
Like that. That's the other,
Yes.
I mean, double blue collar. That's like union upon union. You want to get in structures, get in systems. I know some social workers. You can work this.
Exactly. Yeah. We've supported you your whole life. We have poured into your education and this is what you are going to do,
And that role is always tough, but... Kids do that, and then if you're a kid watching this, I'm not saying do the wild thing that you're thinking all the way, but I will say this. You had that close bond with your parents and you keep running off of those principles, they'll they're going to support that too.
They will. And you had said 20s. Your 20s is for this exact purpose. Mm-hmm. And so I talk to people all the time. I'll meet with anyone who wants to meet with me. It's always like, if you're going to come to me when you are young and in your 20s and you're going to ask me for that straight line to a job, I am not going to give you any sort of advice like that. If you want to go to college with one idea in your head of what you want to do, I am not going to, take you off your path. But I actually think that life is a process of learning who you are and actually learning to accept who you are and learning to love who you are. And it takes a long time. I'm still working on that, but we are gifted with certain things that we can do. And when you get older and you have kids and you have a mortgage and you have responsibilities and your frontal lobe has fully formed, and so you're risk averse all of a sudden, it's a lot harder. So before that happens, I would say travel's the best education, and figure out exactly what you're meant to do while you have time on this planet and go do it.
So writing.
Yes.
That naturally connects me to writing means reading. What are you reading at the time? Who are your favorite authors?
What am I reading right now, or what was I reading then?
Then.
Oh my gosh. I mean, that was actually something that I had to change when I had bookshelves that were filled with books. I mean, the canon changed when I was in college from reading old white men mm-hmm. to reading whatever you wanted to read to recreate the canon. So who are some of my favorite authors? Alice Walker, Nikki Giovanni, James Baldwin, Maya Angelou, Rita Dove, she's a poet. Sonia Sanchez, she's a poet. I don't know. I mean, I read a book every 2 to 3 days.
So you're diving into so many of these pivotal writers that, I think there are multiple renaissances of Black literature, as you would say, definitely during the Harlem Renaissance, and then obviously here in Detroit. Shout out to everybody at Broadside Press. I love you. And Dudley Randall and that movement that grows from that, and authors that are in poetry mm-hmm. and in literature, in fiction, and when you talk about Baldwin, just a whirlwind in whatever form we want to go through. You're diving into so much around pushing the boundaries of what can be created in this Black creativity of literature. What was attracting you so much to that, you think, at that time?
I've always written. I have always done that. I mean, I've explored different forms of art, but I actually write to understand the world. And I think that's why I read too. And so some of the folks that you mentioned, Richard Wright is part of that canon. I think that they provided to me, and this is what I love about college, and I would go to college anytime, and I'd go back there and audit classes if I could now. But you are allowed to sit in this structured space of reading and thinking and discussing together. Point blank, that's what college is. That's why you should go to college. You learn how you learn, you study what you are interested in, and you get to take these big, juicy ideas about the world and spend time with other thoughtful people understanding them. That's all that college is.
I think a lot of people would think you go there to get a job. That's kind of the thought process. And I often uplift a lot of what you share because it's not a lot of spaces. Me being a Walsh College grad, there is not a lot of spaces. And even if I am in the room with some of the most conservative managers and leaders of financial institutions where we may have an exchange, but we can really unpack, to unpack to a person leading a financial institution that's beyond conservative and tell them that the whole concept of management comes from the enslavement of my people. I'm not getting forums like that outside of a college.
That's right.
Where they're going to listen because they're the professor.
Yes.
And now we can have a back and forth about my perspective, then I can hear their perspective.
Yes.
And we can engage.
Yes, that's exactly right. And, we talk about, at Skillman, we talk a lot about how there's a job and then there's the work. And so I think you make a mistake if you go to college just to learn how to do one job. Because jobs are going to change. They're already changing. AI is going to change everything, right? But if you get in touch with like your purpose and what the work is, you bring that everywhere you go. So I am a writer. I knew that coming up. I didn't go to my path of social work and law school. I ended up going to the School of the Art Institute. I have a master's of fine art in writing. I am running a foundation and I write all the time. I write letters about what we're doing. I talk about what we're doing. I communicate what is happening, what an understanding of the world is right now. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you can cut a check for like a certain amount of money. I mean, that matters. That's important. But we are all doing social impact work and movement work. And being able to actually explain what we're doing and how we're connected to each other, that is what changes like a project to a part of a bigger quilt and movement. I start my staff meetings with poetry. I write poems for my staff. Once a year, I write a love poem for my staff. And I will put poetry out. I just put something out about everything that's happening with the federal government. And so it is a way of understanding the world around me.
I love that you unpack that, because the other thing that ties into is what we love here, creativity. And creativity and being constructive in a space, and I believe, this is my view, Kari Frazier thought, I bring this up often, that a lot of the systems here are not constructive. They're more destructive, predatory, and extractive, which leads to the need in the balance, because it's yin and yang for things to be creative. So even you being in the role that you're in, I believe is part of that creativity, because the thought process 20, 30 years ago would not have you in that position. It would have someone that thinks completely different because the time is different.
Yes. I mean, I often say that I think it's more important to have an MFA than to have an MBA. And an MBA, I'm not dissing an MBA, it's extremely important, and you learn how to do statistics, which I've never studied and learned how to do. I'll just say that. But to learn how to do critical thinking, to have agency and to express yourself and to think differently, to deconstruct and reconstruct as part of your practice, as part of your everyday, that's needed in no matter what job you do.
I think it's the best thing that we can do in life. One of my favorite Nipsey Hussle songs, Respect Your Passion. It's about building it up to destroy it, unpack it, and it's empowerment. And in the thought process, one of the processes in meditation that I always share, it's like, okay, if this doesn't happen, if I don't have the camera, if I don't have the website, if I don't have, something happens with my hands, I can't do graphic design. If I don't have voice, where am I expressing these thoughts? What does that look like? How does that feel? And I'm not wishing this upon myself. That's where the creativity becomes more engaged.
I mean, I know we'll get to the world around us that we're living in right now, but that exact thought process is what's needed. We're in a moment of massive disruption, and there are different ways to approach it, but having the scenario plan that you just laid out, if I don't have this, if I don't have this, if I don't have this, I still have my mind, I still have my creativity, I still have myself and my agency, so what am I going to create?
And that brings me to the question about, even before we get to now, just the lens of the work you're in. Our friend Brandon Jessup says this, and it's just the truth. The Black community needs everything. So wherever you want to start in helping the Black community, start. So that's health, that's business, that's education, that's anything institutional and any offshoot of that, whether that health is in gardening or cooking or exercise or yoga or mental health, whatever. It's every facet. Our community needs that. In Detroit, due to that framework of the structure, definitely does not resource our communities the same way. So we're feeling that we're at a lack all the time. The feeling and the thought is a reality. Moving past that and in that space, knowing that you're interacting with people that are in such vulnerable positions in thought and in reality, how are you moving knowing that, even though a person puts on their best suit, write their best grant, they're thinking to themselves, we need to do this. This is survival. And you, meaning they're placing the onus on the foundation, could be the difference between survival and not surviving.
Yep. So, Detroit, and I'm going to just like place it in Detroit and in my work. Detroit, as I said earlier, has had a lot done to it and has witnessed in the last, since, the bankruptcy, I guess, tremendous investment in downtown and in Midtown. And, some things that have shifted because of that. The Moody's rating of the city has gone up 2 notches. That's huge. That's really hard to accomplish. The draft, that was the largest draft in the history of the draft. That was big. You see new buildings that are opening, new restaurants that are opening, and the poverty levels across Detroit are, several levels below the poverty line. It's real.
It is so real. And Moody's is what's standing on the bond interest for the city. So it makes it attractive for people to invest. And fresh off my State of Black Detroit and my public comment, like I'm looking at the census data. I assume you live in that space, but annual income in Detroit, we're looking at $35K in a household. Of that $35K, so many families are $12,000 annually. So that's $1,000 a month. It's about, and this is the data that they have, and let's just trust the data, but about 15%. I know my neighborhood.
Yeah.
And I know just the things that function and happen over here of what people are looking for in opportunity. And I live in one of those neighborhoods where there are families that are completely at that line. It's tough.
It's tough. So when you're dealing with poverty, there is not one cause of it, and there's not one solution to it. It is overlapping. It is intersecting. It is multiple systems that have been working against folks for multiple generations sometimes. And so any sort of like fix from philanthropy is limited. And I think a part of it is understanding that. There are lots of places you could start. And when I look at Detroit, I do see that there are folks that are in the housing space. I do see that there are folks that are in the health space, and much more since COVID in the behavioral health space. The education space, there's more of us, but there's not enough of us in the education space. If you look back on the civil rights movement, and I don't know if you've gone to Montgomery or Birmingham or done a civil rights trip like that.
I have not, but I hear so much about it. Cindy Owens came here and basically said, you got to come down.
You do. I mean, I'm looking at you like, okay, well, the next time this trip happens, I can't think of a better person than have you come. Not only because you're walking these paths of our ancestors, but because I feel like you are adding to the story that they were telling at the same time, right? So you're bringing it forward into the present. But when you sit there and you start to see and you're studying like, oh, this is where this bombing happened and this is where this, uprising happened, it was mainly about education. It was mainly about the desire for our communities to be able to be resourced like other communities, to have access to schools, to have access to not certain textbooks, because I think you can argue that a lot has changed in terms of like what has been made available. But you look at the fight for integration, and that wasn't because Black people wanted to be around white people. That was because we wanted access to great schools, because we knew that education was a passport to designing your destiny, and that we were being left out. We were not being handed that passport. So if you just give someone access to resources and a wonderful education, do you solve everything? No, because you need to have a great house to be near a school, and you need to be secure in that house so that you don't lose the house and then you have to move to a different school, which is behind chronic absenteeism. You need to have a great job so that you can get a great house, so that you can live by a good school and that you could stay in that school. You need to be able to be healthy. You need to have access to health insurance. So I'm not confused. But I think for Skillman, who has been funding for 60 plus years, and some of that has been deeply community embedded during the Good Neighborhoods work. That was a 10-year initiative investing $100 million in 6 neighborhoods in Detroit at a time when foundations weren't doing that. To later work, the Opportunity Agenda, that was really understanding the function of schools and how that was such an important role in policy, how Lansing, and I said this to you before, Detroit's fate rests on Lansing's favor, that there actually has to be some policy work embedded to make sure that our young people in Detroit have access to that passport.
And I definitely have a couple questions even connected to that. The first thing that comes about is the communities, selecting those neighborhoods.
Yeah.
And this goes back to that whole concept of poverty. And this is the one argument, as I'm not as anti-capitalist as most people say, just in entrepreneurship. And I also don't necessarily think that this is real capitalism, just Kari argument always. The one thing that is the most grotesque form about capitalism is the concept of scarcity, and scarcity moving forward, ingenuity. So the thought process, even the way I think people misuse the whole "there will always be poor" as a way to quote unquote exploit and be predatory and extract and destruct the communities of being poor, because it costs a lot of money to be poor.
Yeah, that's right.
By selecting 6 neighborhoods, it makes it like, what about the other neighborhoods?
I've heard that a lot.
The challenge also exists as the resources. It's not enough resources to cover a lot of this, because a lot of people in my community, I love being over here, but I think a lot of people, if they can get the opportunity, they're going to leave here for many reasons. Mm-hmm. So uplifting one and not all, even though if you uplift all, it's going to be less impact.
Yeah.
What's the argument when there is always going to be limitations?
Yeah, I mean, you just nailed it. Like, that is the question. I wasn't around for the formation of the Good Neighborhoods Initiative. And I will tell you that as I travel and I listen to folks, what I hear, and I'll be honest, I mean, the things that I hear are biased toward good because I'm a conduit to capital, and people need capital.
Yeah.
So I am the least likely to receive truth a lot of the time, and I know that. So the majority of things that I hear are actually from people who were part of those neighborhoods, that were part of Good Neighborhood, who were able to not like worry about resourcing for 10, actually it was closer to 12 years, at a time where even now folks invest downtown and midtown to actually say, we're going to take $100 million and we're going to commit it to these neighborhoods for this period of time. Like, that was radical.
It was beyond radical. And around that time of even hearing it, I was like, okay, this is interesting, because it galvanized something.
Yeah.
And this is no offense to you people that go there, but this is like I got to develop it a little bit more in the mental dojo. But this is the Cass Tech theory. And I call it the Cass Tech theory, meaning that Cass Tech, and shout out to my cousin Vicky Green, has been teaching there for forever. I'm not saying it's a bad institution, but I am saying that the thought process and the ethos of everything around it creates the Cass Tech student, the Cass Tech teacher, because it's like CT second to none.
Except Renaissance. I mean, you have some,
hilarious. People will definitely say that, and
Mumford. I mean, like there's King. I mean, you're gonna have.
But I'm just saying, like, it was a belief system. Yeah. As those neighborhoods were selected, it wasn't just the money coming in.
Yes.
It was like, now that something's coming, let's put it together. So making it another analogy, it's like when family come in from out of town, let's clean up a little bit more. And everybody's getting involved with the cleanup. Let's get something extra for the family that's coming. So the $100 million galvanized a lot of hearts and mind to push one of the number one things that I think is very devalued in this economy, but social capital. It gathered social capital around those initiatives. I mean, I've had friends that have gone to Osborne like most of my time, but then that initiative, it's like, oh man, you see what they doing over here?
Yeah.
You see what's going on? You see da-da-da-da. Like, it built a level of buy-in from the people because they saw something happening over there. And I'm not dismissing the money itself, but the social capital was heightened.
And you're naming something that's really important. So like that happened, and that was needed, and it was important, and it was dollars, but it was social capital. It was validation. It was energy. It was all of that. And there are more than 6 neighborhoods in Detroit. And so the reality is that the need is huge and the dollars are limited.
So my alma mater, Northwestern, whole different type of school. And you talked about King. I started at King, ended up at Northwestern. Whole different get down. Saw Principal Rogers the other day. Shout out Principal Rogers. Y'all know I love him though. But even when I went there with Principal Lattimore, the resources were different. It was competitive to get in academic games at King and everything, and the debate club and things like that. Whereas walking in Northwestern, and I love my Northwestern experience, but it being labeled as a bad school, it had bad school resources. It had, we were getting some money from what's that? We were getting money from what's the task force that came about after like before 9/11 and everything. Like it was all types of stuff that was predicated on, we know this will happen here. So it functioned in that space. And my mom, I remember, rest in peace to my mom, but the parent teacher group, we're looking at like 4 people. Now we are looking at a more impoverished community. So back to like, do the parents have time to come be engaged with the school and the LSCO? Because that's what it was then, but it just it's a different arc of putting resources in an NO versus a CT, because I believe a lot of it also is the mentality of everybody touching the space, students, parents, people that work there, the neighborhood around it. It just feels different from top to bottom versus going into school where you like, oh man, you go there.
Yeah. When I started, I talked about how it was more than just me spending a year sitting with people and listening and asking questions. It was 21, so my staff had been inside for a year and a half, and they felt disconnected, and so they would come with me to do this. We'd ask a series of questions. Please educate me on Detroit. Educate me on the school systems, which is plural here.
Yes.
Educate me on philanthropy here. Educate me on Skillman here. What can we, do differently? What do we have to keep doing? What can we change? And then we'd end the conversation like, how are you doing? Just as a human, how are you doing? What do you need? Anything? Like, what do you need? And that is where I started to really begin, and the staff too, began to hear how many truths exist in Detroit at any given time. And some of them corroborate each other, and some of them contradict each other. And what I realized is that they're all valid, that they're all right, and they're all real, and that our role isn't to anoint some, to invest in here or there, to pick and leave, but our role is to try to use all of our capital, all of our forms of capital, to make as much change for as many Detroit young people and with as many Detroit young people, not just for, not just some benevolent position of like, we are here to help, but like actually have the experts and the visionaries of Detroit young people at the table inside of a foundation to make these changes. That is what we're supposed to do. So our strategy shift moved from investing in some after-school programs to working on trying to get at the state level a totally different investment in after-school. And I can talk more specifically about that.
Let's open up, unpack.
Yeah. So Skillman was able to fund after-school programs for a period for many, many years. And actually, that's like a hallmark of Skillman's work, and it's something that we're really proud of. Out of school time is what we call it, because it's also summer programs and things like that.
Mm.
We were able to help 4,000 children a year through that project. There are 120,000 children in Detroit. And so by actually funding communities, community organizers, community organizations, working more closely with policy advocacy organizations, for the last 3 years in the state budget, for the very first time, there are line items that go to out of school time. $50 million for the first 2 years, $75 million the last year.
Wow.
That is exponentially more than Skillman could ever give.
Yeah, definitely.
And it comes from funding like grassroots, grass tops, and using also funding positions. So we funded with other foundations, we funded 2 positions in the governor's office where they could actually disperse the funds with an equitable lens of making sure that smaller budget organizations that are in higher concentrations of poverty got funds and got more funds. So you talked earlier about like, you know, you put on your suit and you write a grant and you kind of like send it out into the atmosphere and you kind of know already like it's not for me and it's not coming to me. There is a way that this job actually has to outsmart that, has to rewire that. And we can either try to solve by investing in a few things in a few places, which is great and that's important. Or we could try to rejigger the system itself so that it works differently for more people and outlasts us.
And I can see that art form that you love. The other thing I love, critical thinking, because it's looking at thought processes and bringing in even the thought process that you don't like. So it's like, how do I create the argument for, okay, I don't like this, but what argument are they making to even have this thought process? Because my thought process, I am that person. I often think, shout out Suzanne, like with our 501c3, just the way it's written up, I'm like, I don't necessarily know if we're going to probably get these grants per se and the way we're functioning. Either way, I know if I start this engagement with my community, I have to follow through because I have a lot of very personal relationships with these people. Yeah. So if I start a project, my for-profit entity is going to have to fund whatever we get going with, because it's hard to go around the corner and talk to the people I'm engaging with and say, hey, the money ain't come, so I can't do it. Or the money didn't come this year, so we're not going to do it. Nah, that's how I feel. And I'm not shading any other organization that functions differently. The relationships and how I can continue to grow and, you know, keep my cameras here and welcome you into the house and all of that stuff. It's like I got to follow through on the relationships that do exist, grow the seed all the time. So to think to yourself, okay, how do we change the system itself by supporting some elements of the system? Because the same way that Skillman's resources are limited, the system's resources are limited.
Yep. Yes. And so how do we support in the system the pressure against the system, the actors that have huge influence on the system, and then how do we understand the capital that we bring to bear as much more than money. So you talked about social capital. We call it SMURF. So we talk about our social capital, our moral capital, our intellectual capital, our reputational capital, and then our financial capital. And actually, we're not in our jobs to sit inside a conference room and like dream up solutions for other people and then make it overly academic and then like inject it into the world, and we're actually like part of it. We've got to hustle. We've got to like find partners and build trust because we're in an industry that actually breeds distrust. So we have to build real relationships. We have to take the position that we have where we have sort of a bird's eye view of things that are happening. We have to share information and we have to hustle to try to make change.
So when you talk about hustling and making that change and that investment into the system and the structure of education,
how do you do that?
How do you do that, especially because it's such a disconnect, like I say, and I was jokingly saying that, but I was being real about like a lot of people leave high school because I look at college as a different type of structure and really romanticize what their high school experience was because they're not really thinking, it's all this, they need to know math and they need to know science and it's like, are you interacting with any young people today, and do you really think about what your school experience was? Because young people today are completely different, even with my staff. Shout out to all of them, my little homies. but and they're all like between like 18 and 24, and this throws me all the time. I'm learning from them.
This is Gen Z. Gen Z is very different, and they are here to save us. I'm telling you.
I mean, I jokingly threw this to one of my friends I know, and it's like the guys all came in here. So it's a group of guys that work with me too. Some young ladies, but now it's more young dudes that's been working with me. All like 18, 19. And they came in here 7 deep and they just did a podcast on a Friday night. And I was thinking to myself, like, this is just a whole different thought because for 7 of my homies to get together on a Friday night, it'd have been like some type of party. Somebody's like, hey, do your girlfriend got some friends? And we'd have never done anything like, we wouldn't have spent 5 hours, but they're functioning differently. And I'm not saying that we were bad and they're better. I'm just saying it's culturally, it is very, very different. Even some of the stuff that now interacting with, okay, we're going to do this way or that way. The way they're learning within technology, how things function. That's why you see so many more reels because it's like, okay, they're not going to sit through the 2-hour interview.
No one's going to sit through this. I mean,
that's their age, and not a lot of people our age. Yeah. But I love the long form because it gives me a full context.
Yeah, I mean, what I'll say is, they have watched institutions fail and fall. So 18 to 22, those are your little homies that you were talking about. Gen Z is like 14 to 28 right now, 29. In their lifetime, they've watched COVID happen.
Yeah.
They've watched an entire world shut down with no solution for a while. They have seen now, with the shift in the federal government, they have seen all of these things suddenly be threatened that they would end. They don't have faith in traditional forms of school or journalism or health. They are much more likely to talk about their mental health needs. They're much more likely to talk about their holistic needs, and they're intersectional in their analysis. They don't think there's any difference between racism and climate justice.
And that's why one of the projects that I'm working on with them, and it was accepted. I told my project manager, it's like, we got to get them in the camera so that they can get this experience so they're not just liking, because some of it is, you can like technology, but it's like you need that same experience. So we are launching a 3-part series with U of M Detroit Center, and shout out to them, but called A George Floyd Moment, because many of them were freshmen watching that in lockdown, and that moment was for a lot of them like the only thing I can liken it to was like an Emmett Till moment for them. And the funny thing in their responses, and now that we're the iteration of the young women, we did it for the young men for Martin Luther King Day at the end of this month. It's March. We're going to do it with the young women to older women. Is everybody above is like, oh, that ain't mean nothing. That ain't mean nothing. But for them, the way they're functioning and talking about systems and how they thought systems would respond and what would be the response, and just looking at their perspectives juxtaposed against some of our perspectives has been that's very dynamic and interesting too. As you talk about that moments in time that are snapshots that stick out in their mind. Absolutely. Of like, this is what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the George Floyd moment sticks out. I think that's a big moment. I think even when I watched the uprisings in reaction to that moment, if you look at who was organizing then, it was Gen Z. And they were organizing multicultural, multi-generational coalitions that were taking to the street pre-vaccine. And they were talking about police reform to police abolishment. They were talking about climate justice. They were talking about education justice. They were talking about indigenous rights. Like it was connected to them. It goes back to what we were saying about looking at the city of Detroit. How do you come in and solve a problem? Well, I'm going to talk to you about education and its connection to civil rights. And I'm going to talk to you about how education systems are set up and the promise of public education, where it has fallen short, and what we can do to try to transform those systems. They're going to talk about something completely different that they are imagining that is otherworldly and futuristic, that isn't reliant on continuing systems or building up systems or reform. They are very different. They have seen institutions fall and fail. And so they're ready for disruption, because that's a childhood nostalgia for them, is disruption.
And that's where I believe the chaos comes opportunity, the crisis and opportunity, yin and yang. It's tough. And often my opportunities are found there, like my dad and the entrepreneurship. It's like, I believe my best opportunities are when things are crashing or something's brand new from the start.
Yeah.
If everything's afloat, I don't necessarily know if you call it Kari Frazier and the Detroit is a different team. It's like we're starting something or we don't know where things went left. And it's like, let's get creative, because now we can try what we never tried before. Hence, even trying what you tried before now of saying like, okay, let's fund a position in the governor's office to execute this properly. Because if it ends up in the same bureaucracy that the system already presents itself, then clearly it's going to deliver the same outcome.
That's right.
So that is, I just can only imagine trying to institute something like that in 1995. It would be looked at like, what are you talking about? And Alice and Black Family Development may have already had ideas like that. And shout out to Alice. And
yes,
big
Miss
OG.
Alice.
Yes. But that's not where the world was at that moment. So as you all even have this, or not you all, just you yourself, how do you keep even a loop, because you're a mom yourself, on staying in the pulse of where young people are functioning, how they're responding to stuff, what's impacting them?
Well, first is understanding that I am not a young person.
Okay.
And I really started to understand that pre-pandemic.
Okay, the playlist, I'm just messing with you.
I was actually, I was doing something with my youth council, and we were at the American Indian health and family services space. We were going around and saying like what was on our playlist and that we just were listening to. And I was like, oh, I was just listening to Sade. And one of the kids said, oh yeah, my grandmother likes that.
It's like, oh.
I was like, you know. Okay, I'm not ready for that. But so yes, I'm not a young person. And I noticed that when I was in Chicago and I was at Field Foundation, we funded a lot of community organizing. And I started seeing like the proposals that were coming in, like there was no head of an organization. There was like no hierarchy. Instead, it was like co-directors, triple directors. Or sometimes it wasn't even a nonprofit. It was like, we don't believe in the nonprofit industrial complex.
Yeah.
We are a cooperative and that is how we function, And I was like, what is happening? Like, this is a totally different way of thinking. So I understand, and even just what I described about watching all the uprisings during COVID and post George Floyd, I watched them saying they are asking for different things. They are organizing in a different way. And it isn't like one thing and one solution. They're taking a bite at the entire problem. They want nothing short of a real diagnosis and a real solution. And so in order to get to a different future, I am not the person to lead us there. I can't do that, but I can move capital. I can have my own revolution that is in the boardroom instead of in the streets, And so if I remain unconfused about who the visionaries are, and I remain unconfused about the connection between what you're protesting for in the streets and what you're working to move in the suites, then I can actually be coordinated and make progress. I have a youth council, and I realized upon my first meeting with them that they actually did not want to offer me like platitudes and advice about young people. They were like, can I have the car keys? Can I drive here? And so they are grant makers. And every year, they've created their own rubric. They determine like what they're going to give away to whom. They make all of their decisions with each other. They decide how they're going to share their decisions or if there's any reporting. And they give away $250,000 every single year.
That's phenomenal. I even thinking outside the box like that's powerful.
It's huge. And we are watching not to be like, did you do that right? But to be like, what'd you do there? Like, what do we need to learn and understand about how you're cutting through a lot of this? I have a small board. There are 11 of us. 2 positions are held for Gen Zers. So that we have them at the table. And it's not one who's tokenized to speak on behalf of youth, but 2 are there to really be a voice. Like Detroit young people, I always say they're my boss, but they're literally my boss. Like they need to actually be in the room that's deciding what our moves are.
And this goes back a little further in the conversation as we get to a close. Housing, as you say. I really didn't understand a whole lot of this. Shout out my homie Heidi that did a project around this of so many people select houses based on schools. And schools is the way that I see redlining still existing in America, personally. Because if a person says it's a bad school in this neighborhood, what they're saying is it's not a lot of what we would consider traditionally white people here that have affluence and influence on certain things. So in multiple systems, as you talked about, because there are charters here and the public school and then a lot of the homeschool options and what functions within that.
Yes. So do you want to talk about that? Because you had started with that.
Yeah, I want to talk about that. And then also just knowing as even how people are even looking at defining quote unquote good school, which I hate that concept. But how do you start?
Yeah. Detroit is very unique in that there are just as many charter schools in Detroit now as there are traditional public schools. And that's the district. So I say DPSCD is, I call them traditional public schools because the charter schools are also public schools. And I think that gets forgotten a lot. So when we hear from the federal government that they want to do school choice, they're talking about something different. They're talking about privatizing education, giving families a voucher to pay for a small portion of a religious school or a private school, and not pay for transportation and not think about special needs. And then it actually is the school's choice because private schools then can reject people or accept them. So we are in a different situation in Detroit where students are evenly divided between traditional public schools, public charter schools, and homeschools are a huge part of Detroit too. And that's always been, there's actually a tradition of like African villages of like, we want to educate our own youth and we don't
freedom schools.
We don't want them to actually be indoctrinated in these ideas, Western ideas of who they are and their values. So what we saw during COVID, that actually increased. And so at Skillman, we're agnostic about that. And actually we fund folks that represent traditional charter, traditional public charter schools and homeschools because we believe all of that is important. What is a good school? You know, I think this is such a good question that we need to ask whomever our next mayor will be in this city. How do we make sure that Detroit is a place where every young person and every elder can thrive? That's what we actually need. And so much of it revolves around a school. Now, research will tell you that a good school, a school that actually produces strong student outcomes, which is what I think people most often correlate.
Which are based on tests.
Which are based on standardized tests that are given. I think that the core from research, what we know is that a sense of belonging is actually the thing that translates into a good school. Isn't that wild? A sense of belonging for the students and for the educators and for the administrators and for the families.
Like I say, the buy-in and the thought process and that mentality. Hence, I brought up Cass, but Renaissance has that and many other, I guess, what you consider good schools. But also at Northwestern, 2001, that was the right school for me.
Yes.
So much I also think is specific on the personality of the kid or the person going to that school, you know?
Absolutely.
So Northwestern was perfect for me.
Yeah.
Because it was like, okay, I'm definitely not, you know, it was like I was Urkel at Northwestern. I was like Bishop at King. And it's like, okay, can't be that here because these guys are, give me that notebook. You know what I'm saying? So, but it worked well for me. Now, I definitely would not necessarily say everybody should go there.
Yeah.
You know, because some of my friends, it just didn't even make sense. Like, you know, it's like, why do so many people drop out in 12th grade? And then I'm in that 12th grade where so many people dropped out, you know, and that was their journey. And so many other reasons why along the way, you know, or here's the classic one. So second chance school, which is night school. It was people I know that skipped regular school all day and they be in night school. And it's like, what? This don't even make sense.
But, you know, I think there is a responsibility that goes back into the school system to create spaces that
multiple options.
For multiple options and not just the ones that I described, you know. So do you know how many school districts are in the state of Michigan?
Oh, boy. Wait. I like Price is Right.
Let's play. You are the next contestant.
Michigan's big. I'm going to just roll the dice and say, I'm going to say 300. That's what I'm going to say. Up. Oh, man. See, the person next to me is like, I could have said $1. I'm just 301. I'm just, all right. So, all right. Now we're going to go way up then. 1,500.
Okay. There are 850 school districts. Okay. How many school districts do you think are in Maryland?
That make me think it's way less. 50.
24. How many school districts are in California?
Okay, it has to be about 600 over there.
It's about 900. California's 4 times our size.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah. And so we have a closer number of school districts to a state that is 4 times our size. And the reason that we do is because we have this public charter system where they could each be their own district. They could open and they can function and they can do a bunch of different things. But the deeper reason why is because there is this myth of individualism that exists here. And it is the concept, and this is a statewide idea, that like, well, our kids are going to be fine, right? Like, well, if we don't like it here, then, well, we'll just open something up and do it differently here. So at the end of the day, you have all of these disparate school districts that need support, that need cohesion, and so you just break that down into Detroit. How do you actually have a cohesive vision of what education needs to look like in Detroit if you have so many different districts that function? You have charters that don't coalesce with each other. You have dollars that are coming from outside, and nobody is saying they want mayoral control of the schools. I know that folks in Detroit probably wouldn't raise their hand, depending on the mayor, I guess, but they wouldn't necessarily raise their hand and say, like, yeah, the mayor should be in charge. They want to elect their school board so that they can be in charge of the schools. But because there's no, like, affiliation, then you have the mayor cutting all of these deals for downtown and all of this investment, and there are no dollars that come back to the schools. Every conversation that's happening with any person that wants to invest in the city of Detroit, the question should be, what are you doing for the public schools?
And in the school systems themselves, because you uplift something that definitely, a lot of times people are definitely against mayors being involved in schools before, but today is such a layered capacity. And I found out so much more of this by being, and right now, shout out Jerry Williams, but the president of Northwestern alumni for so long, and just distributing turkeys, or anytime we would give the scholarship to the students of, a student could start living across, and this, to me, the relationship of poverty kind of goes into this because the transient nature of where people live. So like, the student could start across the street from Northwestern, get kicked out of Northwestern, then end up in River Rouge. And then from River Rouge, end up at a charter school in Inkster. And then because Inkster, love for Inkster, but their school system, like Highland Park or whatever, a lot of discussions.
Yeah.
But then they're bouncing because the parent is moving, but they're also bouncing between district and district and district and district, and what's in this system, what's in that system, who's still doing online school, who's not doing online school, so I'm just like, hey, I want to get you a turkey. And then they're like, do you know what's going on with the school? And it's like, I'm not even from the school.
But that's a systems issue. Actually what we're hearing today about the case that happened in Pontiac of the 3 children that were living on their own for years. And the solution that's being put forth actually by the sheriff in Pontiac is something that you'll hear education systems folks talk about all the time. And that is, you should not be able to disenroll your child from a school without evidence that your child has been enrolled in a different school and those systems connected and talking to each other. So if children are disappearing, which chronic absenteeism is because of, children are being moved around or doing different things, they get lost totally in these systems. This is a big deal for foster care, young people, that there isn't this connectivity of the data and the systems. So we're living in a time where data is disappearing from federal websites, data is disappearing from the Department of Education. What we actually need here in Michigan is we need more cohesion. We need a vision for education across the state, but certainly in Detroit, we need the data systems to connect with one another so that we can get to where we need to go.
Because it's extremely commonplace. And this is where I'm telling you, it's not the Saved by the Bell era. Recall in the beginning of this. For the journey of a student starting 9th grade at a school and finishing 12th grade at the same school, it's just not.
It's not
that's
happening.
not happening.
Yeah.
They may go to 4 or 5 different schools and then get some homeschool throughout their
And
high school
online.
journey.
Yeah.
And yes, also the online schools.
Yes.
Within their high school journey.
Yeah.
And that's commonplace. Like, talk to some of the young people that you walk past and tell them what to do. Like, listen to them.
Yes. And we don't have time, but we haven't even touched curriculum yet.
Oh, man.
And what type of an upgrade is needed there so that we actually, our young people are learning what they need to learn, which is learning how to learn, which is learning how to be adaptive, which is practicing critical thinking, which is having some media literacy. And I say young people, but we all need this too right now, right?
Everybody. Mm-hmm. So this was wonderful interview. I love it. And yes, I like that you started with that cliffhanger because I was already going to be like, we got to collaborate and do something because I got to get some of the little homies that run with you to connect with some of the little homies that run with me.
Can we do that? Like, so I would love to talk with you again. Can we have some young people here to like really challenge what we're saying?
Yeah.
And like add a whole other dimension to it?
I got a couple that's already ready to back me down all the time.
Okay,
Mr.
good.
Hobson.
Okay.
Mr. Hobson's going to be like, oh, Kari.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yes.
Awesome.
Yes. And then also some of the young women that are going to, the George Floyd moment stuff. I'm going to send you some of that stuff.
Okay, please.
So thank you so much. This was wonderful. People say, you say that to everybody. Nah, but I like this one. I like a lot of the interviews because y'all know it's parts of my personality. But classic Detroit is different questions. Very first car, year, make, and model, year you got it.
Very first car was a 67 Chevy Nova.
Wait, time out. Oh, man, see? Oh.
And I got it. I got it in 87.
Oh, you had a classic.
It was called the Blue Bomber.
Oh. Was it clean or was it?
I mean, define clean.
See, there you go. But still, you had a classic. All right. Where's the first place you went? And I love that you gave a name to it, too.
Yes. Oh, of course. Where's the first place I went in the Blue Bomber?
Mm-hmm.
Well, first of all, I was driving the Blue Bomber before I had a license.
Oh, man.
Because I was the baby of the family.
Oh, yeah.
So I don't know. I think it was just cruising. We cruised a lot when we were younger. I would sneak the keys, go out, take the car, pick out my friends, and we would just cruise around the South Side.
A good cruise is a great connection. Mm-hmm. And then only if they like you, it's a very cheap date.
That's true. That's true.
A good cruise,
yeah.
Good music,
windows down, forget it.
Yes. All right, Blue Bomber. How did it end up with the Blue Bomber name?
Gosh, that's a really good question. I would love to claim credit for it, but I don't actually have evidence.
Hilarious.
I don't know.
All right, so kicking it with the homies. I already love it.
Yeah.
And a sneak out cruise. So that was man. So that means
when you talked about how you were different when you were younger and you did different things.
Yes.
Me too.
Okay, because that means like, okay, also first off, getting an old school out the parking space, sneaking. That's a you were a skilled.
I was.
You were a skilled.
I would like leave things when I left the house, like so I would know when I got home if I was in trouble or not. Like I'd leave a certain lamp on, and, Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, because that car is a loud vehicle, so you had to like
had to
hit the neutral.
Yes.
Okay, I'm not trying to give y'all too many lessons.
Yeah.
Y'all probably don't even know how to drive a stick shift. That's.
I was grounded a lot. I'll just say that.
It was worth it.
It was.
All right. You're the DJ at the end of the fireworks. You're at Woodward and Jefferson. You get to play 2 songs. What songs you playing?
Oh my God. What's the vibe? It's the end of the night and I want people to.
It's the end of the fireworks. The grand finale just happened, but you the DJ. You can play what you want.
I think I'm playing Love LOVE by Kendrick Lamar. And then I think I'm playing Nina Simone. Maybe like put a little sugar in my bowl.
Okay, I like it. Very, very, very introspective on both. All right, so it's a different question for Detroiters from outside Detroiters. This is a wild question for you. And you're a writer. I'm going to challenge you to write a whole book about this.
Okay, good.
Or a poem or something. Alien comes. And it's like, yo, where am I going to get the most Detroit experience in Detroit?
Oh, my God.
Where are you hanging out with E.T.?
Oh, my God. This is a setup.
I don't know. No, this is also another layer where I think our cultures are different, because oftentimes other cultures think aliens would come down and be like destructive, whereas I think aliens would be like hanging out with us.
I mean, there's not one quintessential Detroit experience. So I might say, like, go to the Avenue of Fashion. Just
you with them
up and down. Oh, okay, I'm going.
You and ET is together.
Okay, so then we've got to do that.
Okay, Avenue of Fashions,
and then we have to go to Belle Isle.
That is the number one place where ET is going to.
It is the most incredible, like, gem. It is so gorgeous. I saw a bald eagle at Belle Isle, like over by the Port Authority place.
Wow.
You know, I mean, and the fountains and all of. So I would say, like, you got to get like the culture, the feel, and then you also have to get like the actual experience of standing in like beauty.
So you get ET some clothes,
yeah,
and
some
then
food,
and then some food,
and then some
Detroit.
Okay,
I'm with it. You and ET on the giant slide.
I'm not getting on that slide.
It's gonna go viral.
Yeah, I remember I said that I'm not young anymore. I'm not getting on that slide.
They fixed the problems. That was a G-Mac Cash song.
That was beautiful. That was classic Detroit. I feel like that song came out like the same day too. Like it was like
G-Mac is brilliant.
Yeah.
And what's crazy is like he's a good rapper.
Yeah.
You know, his sister is cool too. Like he's one of the like Detroit gems that just talented of just same day. It's like he started with, like, I remember him from rapping when we used to do open mics, and then it hit with Popeye's Got Roaches. So shout out to the viral sensation of Popeye's Got Roaches. Ooh. And not anything that happens, he's like.
Did he write about Lafayette, Coney?
I'm gonna I will.
Because
I don't think he did that one.
I haven't heard that yet.
I don't think he did that one. But
now, did he do something about the Detroit sign?
Yes.
Okay, then I did see that.
Yes. Yeah. He's always, you know,
right away.
Yeah. He's fast with the pen, the beat, the Detroit style, the feel. Like G-Mac also like he's he figured a lane out, and that he's creative and in that space. It's amazing. So I love it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Peace.